Thank you, worship team. Well, this morning we have the privilege of having a guest speaker this morning, Armin Asadi. Armin is a friend of Pastor Larry's and is a co-host with their Bold Idea podcast. A few of the other things that he is involved in, he's consulted 150 churches, including our own, in helping us get our Connect groups started this spring. He also has helped with 35 church plants, is involved right now in a strategic position with ministry to military, and if that isn't enough, has a software company. So welcome with me, Armin.
I think I'm on mute. Sorry, guys. All right, can you hear me now? Awesome. The millennial that doesn't know how to use tech. I feel like I should be sent to jail or something. How are you guys doing this morning? You guys doing all right? So Larry told me to greet you guys on his behalf, and he says he misses you guys, but I'm going to call him out on his lies because I just saw his pictures and it doesn't look like he's missing anything. He's having a pretty good time, so when he gets back, you guys can, give him a little hard time. Typically, I want to do something so that people can get to know me. Is it okay if I don't do that so we can go straight into the message? Are you guys okay with that? I'm not looking for more Facebook followers or any other social media. You won't remember my name because it's a foreigner name. It's Armin Asadi. By the end of this message, everyone's going to call me Armin, Arlene, Amin, or Amir. I'll respond to all of them. You can call me Bob, Ahmed, doesn't matter. It all works for me. So I'll give a very brief, I am from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Don't worry, I have no terroristic affiliations of any kind. You're all safe, including me. And because I work with the military a lot, typically with special forces guys like the 82nd Airborne, the Green Berets, I have to lead with that because I'm the one at risk in those situations, not... So, I try to be very, very upfront about that. But today's topic that I want to kind of cover with you guys are going to be so excited about this. You guys are going to just hear it and be like, oh man, this is going to be so entertaining. We're going to talk about shame. Woo! Exciting stuff, huh? Yeah, you guys excited? All right. I'm glad you guys could fake your way through that with me. All right, so before I get into this incredibly depressing topic with you guys, I just want to pray and go from there. Is that okay with you guys? Awesome. Well, Jesus, we just want to welcome you into this place, God, because if this isn't about you, if this isn't from you, if this isn't through you, and this isn't for your children, then this is a waste of everyone's time. So, God, we surrender this moment to you. We submit it to you in your spirit, God, and we just pray, Lord, that I decrease and you increase, and it is your presence that is felt and your spirit that is felt. And I pray that lives are changed through your inspiration. And God, we just pray for a Super Bowl victory for the Vikings. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. No one, well, sorry. That was nice being here, guys. All right, so let's just get into shame. This is this is going to be on an Orthodox message, just because I'm with military again. So a lot of the preaching that we do on military bases, a lot of it has to have data behind it. It has to be backed by statistics. So we usually do our sermons in a way that informs people in the most non-biblical way possible, and then we take it to a biblical standpoint. So if you think I'm about to sound heretical or blasphemous, it's because I'm not preaching yet. I'm just providing information, okay? Also, being a Middle Eastern, I get intense. I'm not Norwegian. I'm not stoic. And all Middle Easterns, we always sound angry. Even when we're asking mom what's for dinner, it sounds like, it's just... So don't worry, I'm not mad. I have a Middle Eastern disease called too intense. All right, so since nobody here or anywhere else cares about my opinion, including my wife, I'm going to give you guys information from the foremost thought leader on the topic of shame and vulnerability. How many of you guys have heard of the Dr. Brene Brown? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Awesome. That's actually more than usual, even in an auditorium of 2,000 people. So this is mostly her research, her content. She's literally written 16 books around this. And again, I promise I will bring Jesus into this. It will become biblical at some point, all right? Do I have your guys' permission for that? All right. Sometimes I feel like people are going to stone me when I don't go into Bible right away. So I'm going to ask you guys a really, really controversial question, okay? Because everyone's going to assume that I have some kind of judgment on it. I do not, okay? So let me ask you guys this question. How many of you guys have heard or seen or witnessed a pastor or a church leader of some kind be booted from the church because they got caught in sin? Okay. And the other people who didn't raise their hands, you guys have never even heard of it in the news or papers or anything like that? Oh, okay, all right. So let me ask you guys a question. When we see the spiritual leaders of our faith, we see them fall into sin, right? I'm not justifying their sin. I'm not making it okay. I'm not doing anything like that, okay? But they come out with their sin, and then 2 weeks later, you usually see what happened after. What happens once you see them come out and confess their sins? Talk to me. Fired, they're gone, right? It's an excommunication process, right? Again, I have no judgment on this. I'm not justifying anything. The topic isn't even them. The topic is us and our subconscious. What does our culture of faith tell us about if we're going to be vulnerable about the things that we're ashamed of, called sin? If I come out with my sin, what's going to happen to me? Pushed aside. It's judged, right? So again, the judgment is not on whether what they did was right or wrong or how. I'm trying to bring you guys to an understanding of how much shame is ingrained into the soul of our culture. And the hard part is we don't even realize it, so we miss it, and we constantly deal with this vicious cycle of shame. And I will say this, shame is the number one killer of destiny. Shame is the number one killer of you being able to answer your call. Shame is the number one predictor to you being able to fulfill the full calling that God has on your life, for you to even be able to attain half of what God has given you. Because shame kills our souls. And a lot of times we're convinced that shame is some kind of a feeling or some kind of a thought process. But if you actually go into shame and process it, you realize shame is actually it's an identity that we take on. Do you get what I'm saying by that? Maybe a couple of examples. Okay, say you launched a business, that business failed. What would you think about yourself? Failure, right? That's shame, right? Just because I failed doesn't make me a failure, right? Just because I made a mistake, it doesn't make me a mistake, right? But there's a difference between the way the enemy works and the way God works. The enemy will try to tell you that your failures make you a failure as a human being. Your mistakes make you a mistake as a human being. But God gives us something called conviction. And conviction is really different. It's not telling you how terrible of a human being you are and why you should be better. There's something inside you that it almost grieves, because God gives you this awareness that you have potential to be something, and conviction is almost a grief that says, Why am I doing this, going the opposite way versus this way? And it's almost exciting. You venture towards something. God doesn't put the shame on us. God puts something exciting in our hearts that says, I have something better to live towards. I have a happier life I can have. I have happier relationships I can engage with, right? Shame, conviction, very different. Focus, we're going to focus on shame. Again, because I wholeheartedly do believe it is the killer of destiny. I don't care how successful you are. I don't care how many millions you've made, what kind of title you have, what kind of status you have. If you deal with shame, I promise this, that you still have not even seen a glimpse of the amazing destiny that God has for you. And the most common issue I deal with military people is I deal with the leadership more often than the soldiers. So I'm dealing with the lieutenant colonels, and one-star generals, and so on, right? And one of the things I deal with them more often than not is they're getting old, so their assumption is the best is behind them, so they're going to spend the rest of their life sitting on their deck, drinking sweet tea. They're the worst retired people you will ever see in your life. Absolutely the worst at retiring. They retire and work 20 more hours a week than they did before they retired. It's the craziest thing. They can't retire, but they convince themselves that they can. But the reality is, the best is not behind them, and it sometimes takes a year of boredom for them to realize, wow, I got so much in me. But it takes a year because you're dealing with this thing called shame. So we're gonna keep going. I know this is boring. Don't worry. We'll get somewhere fun. And at some point, I want you guys to process this thing called vulnerability that Brené Brown talks about quite often. So Brené Brown says, if we want to kill shame, there's a process to killing shame. And this is, again, not based on opinion. This is data-driven, research-driven. She says, if you're going to go on the path of destroying shame in your life, then the next step is that you need to be vulnerable. Now, how many people would actually raise their hands in here and think that we live in a culture that vulnerability is something we're really good at? I got a thumbs down. That's the closest thing to a hands up I got. I appreciate that. But here, the foremost thought leader on this topic says this: vulnerability is the birthplace of connection to the path of the feeling of worthiness. If it doesn't feel vulnerable, the sharing is probably not constructive. Should I read that one more time? Okay. Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection on the path to the feeling of worthiness. If it doesn't feel vulnerable, the sharing is probably not constructive. And I'll say one more quote from her. She says, faith minus vulnerability and mystery equals extremism. If you've got all the answers, then don't call what you do faith. Okay? I come from a very extreme country. Okay? I have 13 martyrs in my family, law-abiding citizens that were killed for simply not being a specific religion. I mean, like literally, you could walk down the street and look up on a light bulb and you could see one of my cousins hanging from a noose, right? Watching people get whipped to death just because they weren't Muslim, right? Or whatever other issues there are. So when you hear a quote like that from a woman who is a doctor in this field and understands what extremism is, she's saying something so critical that people just breeze over it like it's nothing. So I'm going to read it one more time. Faith minus vulnerability and mystery equals extremism. If you've got all the answers, then don't call what you do faith. There's something so significant and biblical about that that's trying to help us understand something. One, we don't need to have all the answers. And two, if we do have all the answers, then what we're convincing ourselves is we are God. We don't need information. We don't need Bible verses. We don't need to pray because we already know everything. And when you go to the path of extremism, it's hard to get back from that. It is really hard to get back from that. In our culture, we're actually dealing with that. And it didn't just start out by taking prayer out of the schools or Pledge of Allegiance out of the schools. It's turned to something crazier than that, where I have friends with kids that they're pulling out of, I think she's in 7th grade. They pulled her out of school because she's getting bullied so hard over her Instagram picking that she's female. She's being bullied for it because she didn't pick non-binary or something like that. So if you guys think we don't live in a world of extremism, we're literally in the heart of it. Extremism is taking place, and we can pretend like it's not happening, or we can actually see it and deal with it at some point, right? So, all right, I'm going to go a little bit deeper now, okay? So Dr. Brene Brown and her research team asked a couple of questions for us to be able to gauge what does it mean to be normal in America as man and woman, okay? So the way they asked it is, what do women need to do to conform to female norms? What do women need to do to conform to female norms? Can I get a couple guesses from you guys? I know this is Red Wing, and that's scary, but what do you guys think as women? You guys can answer too. What do you think you have to do to conform to norms? Say that again? Be beautiful. That's a phenomenal answer. One more? Cook. That was for you personally. that was into a cultural norm. All right, so I'll give you guys the four points that they came up with in terms of the norms that you have to be to conform to the United States of America's culture, okay, as women, okay? So women, you ready for this? Feel free to vomit at any point. One, you have to be nice. How many would you, women, how many of you would agree that that's a cultural norm? You have to be nice to be normal in America, okay. Two, you have to be thin. Yep, okay. Three, you have to be modest. And see, modesty was taken as like a physical appearance standpoint, but that's not how they meant it. And then this is the one where it really is okay to throw up a little bit, just a little bit, it's okay. It says you have to use all available resources for your appearances. Use all available resources on appearances. That is the cultural norm for women in America. So women, let me ask you something. At what point do you guys feel good enough? Is it a certain weight? Is it a certain length of hair? Is it a certain fashion? Is it a certain style? Is there a certain stat? At what point, ladies, do you feel good enough? Right? Think about this, and this is boring information, but it's kind of eye-opening. How many times a day do you guys think you're advertised to on a daily basis? How many times are you advertised to? Thousands. Is that what you said? Yeah, so this is a statistic from 2010. You're advertised to a minimum of 6,000 times a day. 6,000 times a day. 50% of those ads have some form of sexual innuendo in them. Okay, so let's trim that number down significantly. Let's just say out of that 6,000, only 10%, that's 600 times a day that you guys are being inundated with advertisements that you're subconsciously dismissing, but it's still sticking in your brain that's telling you you're too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too this, too that. No matter what, you're losing. At some point, you're losing. Right? And so here's the other thing for men, why this is important for you to know. Anything from Stanford to Oxford to Cambridge, this research has been done that when someone says something negative to you, what does it take for you to come back to your equilibrium, to your norm, okay? So if you say, hey, you look like an ugly terrorist, I'm a little really hurt, right? And I go home and I have to go talk to my wife, and my wife has to tell me a minimum of 3 times, all the way up to 10 times, depending on whose research you're reading, she has to tell me how good I look, she has to tell me how nice I am, and she has to tell me how good of a father I am. And now, after those 3 minimum, I go back to the norm, right? So men, the reason this is so important for you guys to hear this is regardless of how amazing of a husband you are, let's just assume it is 600 times a day only that they're getting inundated with something that makes them feel shameful about the way they look, behave, talk, whatever, as women, right? if it takes you a minimum of 3 times per negative engagement that they have or interaction that they have, that means you, as a husband, you have to take 1,800 different compliments that you can give your wife per day to bring her back to her norm. I know there's some really good men in here, but how many of you guys just got 1,800 compliments off the top of your head a day? It's terrible. I hate that burden. I hate it. I think it's the worst burden. I'm not even good at complimenting my wife as is. She gets like 3 to 4. You know, I don't have 10 in me, let alone 1,600. Not because she doesn't have all the qualities of 1,600 compliments, but I'm a dumb guy. I'm a dude. I think like a dude. I'm thinking about the Vikings and how they're going to kill the Packers and where I'm going to go eat and what I'm going to do with the ministry and what I'm going to do with my business. And I'm not thinking about how can I compliment my wife. It's a burden on men too, okay? So all that to say is, hey, this content it's real. And here's the one thing about, there's one of those points that most people dismiss. Nice. How many of you guys thought, well, that's not a bad thing? Why is that a bad thing? Of course, we should all be nice, right? Someone? Anyone? No one? Okay, all good. It was just me, so I'll just talk to myself. Here's the thing about women having to be nice to conform to American norms. When a man is a strong leader in a business setting, ministry setting, or any other setting, military setting, right? And he makes, very, very stern decisions or whatever it might be, people look at him and say he's just a strong leader, right? When a woman does that, what do they say? That's the word. So if you look at the research, they literally put that word that you're thinking of that starts with the B in their research, right? These aren't crass people. It's just collecting information and putting it in a report, right? If a woman is not if a woman performs like a strong leader should in certain scenarios, because you're not conforming to the norm of being nice, you are a dog of some kind. Right? This is a losing battle, okay? And my whole goal is just awareness, guys, all right? I'm not trying to depress you. I'm not trying to make you suicidal. That's not my goal. I promise this will get better, okay? But I got to cover the men too, ladies, all right? Is that okay? So men, what do you think you have to do to conform to male norms in America? Be strong, successful. One more. What was that? Tall? I hope not. I'm not winning that battle. All right, so I'll give you the 4 that they came up with men. Okay, and raise your hand if you believe that this is a societal norm for us. And this helps me when you guys raise your hand or don't, because it helps me get a good idea of how many people align with this research and don't. So 1, men, you always have to show emotional control to conform to American societal norms. How many of you would agree with that? Okay. 2, work is first. Yeah, I know you're scared. My wife's sitting next to me. I'm like, no, that's not true. I love you. You're first, baby. 3, pursue status. Just think social media. The world's changing real quick. And then 4, it's violence. I don't even know what that means. I don't know if I'm just supposed to go up to somebody and punch them so I can feel normal. But I'm not exactly He-Man over here. It's not going to work out well for me. This societal norm does not sound great for me. That just sounds like a lot of time in the hospital that I don't want to spend. I like my face, just the way it is. My nose is huge. Other than that, I'm just side note, I do have insecurities. Okay, so let's pick on one, okay? Let's just pick on one of these 4. If work is first, what cannot be first? God, that's a great answer. What else? One of you 2 said something, didn't you? Family. Yep. And I heard something else over here. God, family. Mother-in-law. Good answer. I'm assuming you're the mother-in-law? Okay. Yeah. So here's the thing about that. Is work being first, is that a terrible thing? Some people would say, but then you look at American history, we tout about work as first. It's what created the Industrial Revolution. It's what made America so powerful, right? So, what's that? Revolution? Pollution. Noted. So guys, here's the lose-lose situation, right? So you walk to work is first. You walk to church, what is first? God is first, right? You go home, what is first? I heard a bunch of family, but wives, how many of you know? Not think, you know. It goes God, then who, then who? God, wife, kids. Right? Maybe I'll just talk for my wife. If I ever let my wife know that my kids are more important than her, that'll be the last conversation I have without a black eye. That's not working for her, right? So if work is first when you're at work, God is first when you're at church, and wife is first when you're at home, and you can't have three first places. You're not a hard enough worker. You're not a good enough godly man. You're not righteous and holy enough. And you certainly are not a good enough husband because you can't put your wife first if work is first or anything else is first. So gentlemen, at what point in your life do you feel good enough? No, really. I'll wait. At what point do you feel good enough? Can you feel good enough? There's a lot of this stuff sounds okay, but when you put it into perspective and you start realizing that you live in a cycle of shame that makes it impossible for you to feel like a good man, that's a terrible situation. If you look at the data and research that's out there, what is one of the main reasons that men go to porn? If you categorize it, all these different little things that came up, if you put vast majority of them, you can put under one category. Guess what that category is? Shame. Shame. How many of you growing up heard mom or dad say shame on you? Ingrained in our culture, not even realizing how much it impacts our identity as individuals. Again, shame is not a feeling, it's not a thought, it's not a process. It is a judgment that becomes identity, okay? So they put this in the best way possible. They said if you were to put shame in a petri dish, it would need 3 different ingredients to grow exponentially. What ingredients do you think shame requires for it to keep growing in your life? What would you guess? Just one guess. Believe. Criticism. See, it's even tough processing shame, isn't it? It's like you think you would have answers, I get shame, but you don't. Don't talk about it. Who said that? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys the 3 that Brene Brown came up with, okay? These are the 3. If you're taking notes, if you don't want to take notes anywhere else, just write these 3 down, okay? These are 3 ingredients that are required for shame to grow exponentially in your life. Also, if I can identify any one of these 3 ingredients in your life, then you can say without a doubt that you're dealing with shame, okay? You ready? 1, secrecy. 2, silence. 3, judgment. For shame to exponentially grow in your life, you need secrecy, silence, judgment. Secrecy, silence, judgment. Secrecy, silence, judgment. Okay? And here's the part that most people miss is the judgment part. Is they think, you're judging me, oh, you're too skinny, and I'm judging you, oh, you're something else, whatever, right? But here's the weird thing most people miss is that you actually judge yourself more than you get judged or judge anyone else. Combined, you judge yourself more. What does that sound like? A little bit of shame, maybe? Right? So then they followed this up with the question that says, so if it requires secrecy, silence, and judgment for it to grow exponentially, then how do we kill shame? And they realize that it only has one ingredient to kill shame. It requires 3 to grow exponentially, but it takes one thing to kill shame. Can anyone guess what that one thing is? Talk about it, yes. What was? Name it. Name it and claim it? Is that? I hear you. No, that was good. Well played. I love it. So here's the thing. The one thing that is required for us to be able to kill shame is empathy. And I was just as confused when I heard that. Empathy? It was weird. I'm a guy. That's forcing me to access emotions. I don't like emotions. And it freaked me out. It freaked me out. I was like, what do you mean, empathy? So I dug into this, and I had to try to figure out, how do you even do empathy? Guys, come on. At least there's got to be some other guy in here that can say, empathy isn't easy for me. I'm not the only guy in here, am I? Thanks, guys. Super appreciative of that support. Thanks. So here's the thing. The 2 most powerful words that a human being can hear when they're in the middle of a struggle is this: me too. 2 most powerful words an individual who's in the middle of a struggle can hear is me too. But in the Christian culture, what do you think are 2 most common words that come out of someone's mouth when they go, let's just say I come to you and I say, hey, I have a crazy porn addiction, blah, 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 something embarrassing. What do you think the most common responses are from Christian circles when someone is sharing a struggle with someone else? I'll pray for you. I heard something else. I'm always looking at you two because I know you guys are talking to me. I like it. All right. What else? I heard someone else say something. Okay, it's all good. So here's what it is. You should. Or you shouldn't. So in the least emotional way, let me tell you why that's completely counterintuitive. If I come to you and I confess my sin to you, whatever that may be, sex, lust, porn, anger, violence, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, right? And I come to you and I share the struggle with you, and the instant you tell me what I should do, guess what just happened? Emotionally, yeah, I shut down, but we walked into the meeting kind of side by side, right? And then all of a sudden you start telling me what I should do, so you're basically positioning yourself as superior to me, and then you start telling me things I should do that are extremely obvious, right? And put me in a position of inferiority. So when you make me feel inferior in your hope to help me, does that take away the shame? Kind of perpetuates it, doesn't it? That's our culture. That's our actual culture. You guys might think I'm crazy. That's okay. You probably already do. But just take it for what it's worth. If someone is an alcoholic, they probably already know they should stop drinking. Just throwing that out there. If they're violent, they probably know they should stop fighting. The number of assault charges and time in jail and divorces and whatever else, they probably know they should stop being violent. So us telling them, hey, you should stop drinking, I promise isn't some like epiphany. They're not having a revelation. Like, that's what was missing in my brain. I should stop drinking. Why didn't I think of that? All we do is literally someone takes this bold, courageous, audacious step towards vulnerability in a culture that says you could very, very likely be shamed, judged, and excommunicated. They come to you, and then we try to tell them what they should do as if they're morons. And we think we're helping. It's the craziest thing in the world. I did that. I'm not above that in any type of way. But if you think about it from the perspective of taking these 2 little words, it changes everything. It's so crazy, right? You get me too. Me too. That's all it says, right? Hey, you deal with anger? Me too. Me too. You get violent sometimes? Me too. You deal with lust? Me too. You were trying to pray last night and read your Bible, but you fell asleep within 30 seconds? That's my nightly ritual. That's my... I'm not psychic, don't worry.
You were driving the other day and you had your grandkid in the back seat of your car and some punk college kid cut you off and risked her life in the back seat, so you wanted to pull in front of him, pull him out and beat the snot out of him? Me too. That actually happened to me 2 years ago with my daughter in the back seat, and when I walked out of my car, I saw the Jesus fish in the back, and I thought the hypocrisy of the situation is overwhelming and I can't do it, so I got back in my car. So if anyone tells you Jesus doesn't save lives, he saved that kid's life that day. Risk my kid's life out of your mind. All right, so now let's get it into the biblical context, okay? Now you can judge me for not being biblical if it's not after this point, okay? So Philippians 1:29-30, here's what it says. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Okay, I'm going to read that one more time. It's on your guys' little handouts that you got. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Here's the interesting thing about this verse. The whole Philippians is written by the Apostle Paul. When he wrote this letter, do you know where Apostle Paul was? He was in jail. Do you know what he was awaiting? Execution. And he's writing a letter to a church that is actually doing fairly good in this situation, if you think about it. And he's writing them, and he's doing what? When he says, I see you have the same struggle that I have. What is that? That is a me too, absolutely. He literally put himself in a place of vulnerability and empathy so that he could communicate to one of the most powerful churches to do the most amazing things in the world by doing what? Simply being vulnerable and empathizing. And how many of you guys, think about these verses, okay? How many of you guys have heard the verses that I can do all things through God who strengthens me? How many of you guys have actually heard that? Okay, half the church. That's good. I'll talk to Larry about how he's doing with his preaching. No big deal. And then if we think about any of the other verses that we think about, like transcends all understanding and all these crazy popular verses that are in Philippians, right? You see them on UFC fighters. They have them tatted all across their body. I don't know why it's always Philippians, but it's always Philippians, right? It's some of the most memorized, most noteworthy Bible verses, and it's one of the most memorized books of the Bible in the entire world. And where did that amazing life-changing, life-altering, transformational type of messaging come from? Did it come from a place of victory? Did it come from a place of him sitting on high? Did it come from a place of him sitting in a military leadership position? Did it come from him being rich? Or did it come from the midst of struggle? He is on death row waiting to die, and he takes that struggle and he takes time to write some of the most memorized, most memorable, most profound verses of the Bible so that the world can know your struggle is actually not the end of you, it is the beginning of your victory. Your struggle is the beginning to your victory. And so here's what I want to kind of get across, okay? When you're looking at a situation like this, where you're looking at a Christian leader being stuck in a prison cell, being charged with all sorts of crazy things, and he's about to die, and he's writing letters on behalf of the church so that they can know how to become better individual leaders and become better followers of Christ, there is something so profound in that it made me ask something that I'd never asked before until I processed this. Where did Paul learn that from? Right? There's an easy answer, right? Everyone's thinking Jesus, right? Well, I hope so. Then I really have a conversation with Larry if that was. But at what point of Jesus' life did he make that vulnerability statement? Everyone's thinking about Bible verses and things he said. But here's what I would suggest or I would propose, that God made one of the greatest statements he ever made, and he didn't use words. And it was in the moment where he said, I'm going to get off of my throne in heaven, and I'm going to walk down the staircase of heaven into this world. I'm going to enter myself into the womb of a woman where she will go and give birth to me in a manger surrounded by animals and their feces. And I will be birthed there. Now, let me ask you guys a really morbid question to make the point. What does it take to kill a baby? It takes doing nothing. You don't even actually have to do anything. Could God have put himself in a more vulnerable position? Is that not one of the greatest statements of vulnerability that you have ever seen? You watch God come down from the powers on high, being the ruler of the universe, stepping into this world, into the womb, being born next to animals and their feces, and giving himself to this couple who's never had taken care of a child before, while there's someone out there trying to kill any firstborn sons, basically. Because there's a king that feels like there's a new king being born, and he doesn't want to take his ruler. How crazy is that? And he's born into that. What I love about this, and this is the point I really want to drive home, is that we do not have a high priest who stands on a stage talking down kind of like I'm doing right now. Thank God Jesus wasn't like this. But he's talking down. You have the Pharisees that are constantly talking down to people, convincing them, look, how holy I am. Why can't you be more like me so that you can have the access to the power that I have? Can't you see your inferiority? And can't you see how good I am? But no, we have a Jesus who came in, who literally picked the Pharisees off one by one and said, yes, I may be a priest, but I came into this world so that I can know what your struggle looks like and feels like. We have a God who knows what our struggle is because he struggled. We have a God who knows what is temptation because he was tempted. Think about that. We have a God of empathy. We don't have a ruling deity. We have a God who was willing to sacrifice everything, come down from stage so that he can tell you, my son, my good and faithful servant, you struggle, I get it. You're tempted, my daughter? I get it. I get it. I empathize with you. I was tempted for 40 days and nights. I get it. It is such a profound statement that he's making because he wants each and every one of us to know that there's an opportunity with God that can absolutely revolutionize our entire life. It can transform us. But the reason it doesn't more times than not is because we're somehow convinced that our sins, our temptations, our struggles are somehow a greater, bigger problem than God. And you can tell me you don't believe that because the logic is too easy to say, my problem can't be bigger than God. But let me watch how you react to a big crisis in your life, and I'll let you know if you're being honest with me when you tell me that God is not bigger than, or your problems are not bigger than God. Because most of us, in the middle of a crisis, we respond in a way that says, our problem is now bigger than God. There's a whole process here. And he's trying to say the same thing. I just said it, and I'm going to say it again. Your struggle is not the end of you. Your struggle is not your defeat. Your struggle is not your shame. Your struggle is literally the beginning of something that could be the greatest victory of your entire life. Of your entire life. It is struggle that allowed you to be able to empathize. Because in the middle of a struggle, God gives you the gift of comfort so that when you encounter someone else struggling, you can provide them something called the gift of empathy. Rather than you should. Right? So I'm in the military all the time. We're going to play a video here in a second. And I have never served. I've never served in the military. I wanted to, but I was asthmatic, and the only thing I wanted to do was fly jets. Outside of that, I wasn't having it. I couldn't do it, so I didn't serve. I got into criminal activities instead because I thought that was way better. I'm not joking; it's a true story. What happened in that situation is a little bit crazy because now I'm sitting here and I'm serving military people in the highest ranks, and I'm sitting here trying to figure out how do I empathize with them, and I couldn't figure it out because I realized that empathy factor is the only thing that gets you into the brotherhood per se. Okay, and I had to figure this out. And here's how I figured it out. And I'm going to let the video speak for itself. But I'll give you a little context. Pretty much all of July I traveled. I was home for maybe 5-6 days. I traveled the rest of it being with military. Okay, and last month was one of the first months I really was able to empathize with them on the thing that I realize is the absolute, by far and away, most significant thing. So if we could just play the video quick.
What's wrong, sweetie? What's wrong? What's wrong? I'm sorry, sweetie, I have to go. What's wrong,
That's it,
sweetie?
you can stop it.
What's wrong?
So it's replaying the video, you can. The video I just showed you is me leaving the third time in the month of July to go serve the military. And for 25 minutes, my daughter begged me not to leave. Dad, please don't go. And after 25 minutes, I finally calmed her down and I'm heading out to my car. And I hear the door open and she's crying, Daddy. And I'm like, oh man. And I have to keep my cool because if she sees me break down, it's a lost cause. Right? Nobody's winning in that situation. She's coming to me and saying, Dad, please don't leave. It broke me, but I still had to go. And I went. And I get in front of these, these are special forces leaders, these are manly men, And I get in front of them, and one of them starts talking about their 4-year-old daughter that just happens to be the same age as my daughter. And I broke down crying. And he said, son, what's wrong? I said, sir, I just left my daughter for the 3rd time this month. And she begged me not to leave, but I knew I had to be here. You know what he did? He shared a story of him being deployed for the 4th time and how that was the most painful thing he had to deal with, was leaving his kids and watching them beg. He got a Me Too moment with me. You know what that Me Too moment has led to? Fort Bragg, the largest military installation in the world, has opened up their base for us to go there to hold an event for the sole purpose of leading these soldiers to Christ. It wasn't because I was smart or strategic. It was a simple, vulnerable Me Too moment. I did the vulnerability side, and he did the harder side of just simply saying Me Too. That was the moment he got to see my heart and my ministry partner, and he realized, all right, you guys are the real deal. Let's do this. You want to know what makes it even cooler? Events like this cost us $150,000. We have 3 months to plan this thing. And he said, here, I'll give you 50,000 of it. Military bases give us nothing to do what we do. He just gave us a verbal commitment to $50,000. Vulnerability in a Me Too moment. I'm going to end with this. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Jacob. How many of you guys have heard of the story of Jacob? The reason I love Jacob is he's kind of a low-life human being like I was. So I just relate to him, Even when he's coming out of the womb, he's grabbing at his brother's ankle, basically being like, nah, I want to go first because, I deserve it, I'm entitled. Sounds like a millennial. And he gets the name Jacob, which the most common translation to that name is deceiver, manipulator, supplanter. How many of you guys want to be walking through the hallways at high school and be like, hey, manipulation guy, you, hey, you, right? Like, they're identifying you as a lowlife, right? That's your name given to you by your parents. Thanks, Mom. That's awesome. Thank you. Real great, right? And then you see him go through life doing all sorts of crazy things. He kind of deserved that name, let's just be honest. And at some point you see this scene in the Bible where he's wrestling with this angel of God or God, and they're having this violent wrestling match, right? And it's not your like typical you can tap out type thing. I mean, these guys are going at it to the point where this angel or God touches his hip and dislocates his hip. How many of you have dislocated a hip before? That doesn't sound pleasant. But in that situation, Jacob didn't let go. He kept holding on to this guy, and the wrestling match continues. And in this moment, even with the broken hip or dislocated hip, he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And God in that moment is looking at him, not because he doesn't know his name, but he says, what is your name? And with a form of declaration, he says, my name is Jacob. He gives him his identity. I am the manipulator. And God does something different. He says, I'm going to give you a prophetic declaration right now. It doesn't say it like that, but he says, from this day forth, you will no longer be known as Jacob, but you will now be known as Israel or Israel. First mention. And then later on, God goes on and creates an entire nation of his chosen, selected people, his favored sons and daughters. What is the name of that nation that still exists today? Israel. Do you know what the most common translation of the name Israel is? To struggle with God. You know why that's significant? Because I don't think God blessed and chose Jacob despite the fact that he was a manipulator. I don't think he chose and honored and uplifted and made him this country his favorite people despite the fact that they struggled with him. I think the exact reason he blessed this man and blessed this nation is that they were willing to struggle with God. Your struggle it can be a formula for disaster, or it could be a formula for the greatest victory you will ever see in your life. Because you want to know who people connect with, you want to know how to pastor somebody, is when somebody comes to you and they share their struggle with you, they can have that Me Too moment. Guess what happens? The conversation continues. The prayer happens. And we live in the most socially isolated society on planet Earth, statistically speaking. That is not opinion. America is the most socially isolated society on planet Earth. I'm millennial. The generation after me is Gen Z. This is going to sound harsh, but this is fact. It is the most socially challenged society America has ever seen. They do not know how to hold a conversation. So when you meet someone who's Gen Z and they know how to hold a conversation, you know you're impressed. And you're talking about nothing. If we can risk it, if we can be bold, if we can be courageous, if we can be audacious enough to see that our struggles are real, and not accept them as the defeat or the death of us, but see them as the opportunity and be able to take that step and say, I'm willing to risk vulnerability with you and share my struggle with you in the hope that you won't should on me by telling me what I should or shouldn't do, but having a Me Too moment so that I can realize there's other men or other women in this world that can relate to me so that this does not have to be my identity, but that I could actually engage my destiny. As long as you guys believe that wearing a mask and pretending that you're righteous and holy is what makes you a godly person or a Christian or a follower of Christ, I promise you that is not the plan of Christ. You have literally submitted to the plan of the enemy and not of God. If your struggles are hidden, you're not in God's plans. Why does it say in James that you should confess your sins to one another rather than God to be healed? You keep your life a mystery. You keep vulnerability out of your life. And you keep empathy out of your life, and I can promise you one thing. You will never know how much God has put in you. You will never know the victories He has in store for you. And you will never know the places He wants to take you. And so at this moment, I just want to go into this moment of worship with these two amazing people. And whatever this moment looks like, maybe it's just taking a minute and processing, what am I so ashamed of? What is my biggest temptation? What is the biggest risk to me sharing? Why am I so fearful? Let's just have an introspective moment. Have this one song of worship, and I will close out in prayer. Is that okay? Can we do that? The curse of the shame. Victory of the cross. Every single one of you here deal with shame. Every single one of you struggle. But I'll tell you this. If your struggle is the end of you, then life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ was pointless. If struggle has that much hold of you, you're missing Jesus, man. The real Jesus, you're missing Him. Because He's begging you, God, please let me in. Let me kill your shame. Let me take it on. Let me die for you. Let me atone you. So Jesus, I just pray over every single individual in this room, God. God, regardless of their sin, their temptation, their struggles, I pray that their past does not define them, their mistakes do not define them, their sin does not define them. But God, I pray that they're able to start looking into the mirror and looking in deeper into their own eyes so that they can see you in them. I pray, God, that the identity that they take on is the identity of Christ. And I pray that every single person in this room will not get up and leave unless they know without a doubt a holy, godly conviction that says, my problems, my temptations, my sins, my struggles are not bigger than my God. And my God will not give up on me, for I have a God that is relentless, who can empathize and understands me and will not shame and judge me, but stand in the place of my shame so that I can know victory. So God, the same Spirit that rose you from the dead that is in them, I pray that they encounter that Spirit every single day of their lives. And I pray that it becomes more and more aware to them, even in their struggles. So God, I pray that this church, this community is a victorious, triumphant church. I pray that they are bold and audacious, that they are vulnerable and empathetic, and I pray that they do not judge themselves or others. And I pray that this can become such an amazing flagship of your bride, God, that the world around them will come and say that I know this is a place that I can walk in, not be judged, be welcomed, be involved in a family, and become a better version of myself so that I can see the destiny that Jesus has in my life. May this be a Me Too church. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you.